Welcome to this exam paper question on medicine in Britain. Explain one way treatment was different between the 13th and 16th centuries. So we're looking at the difference between treatment in the medieval and the Renaissance era. As with all of these similar or different questions between two eras, the first thing we do is we talk about one way things were done in era 1 and give an example, then discuss how it was done in era 2 and give an example. So let's go through some of the things you could include in your answer as a way of revising what you could put. And remember, we're talking about treatments being different now. So we're looking for something that's completely different between the two eras, but it has to be about treatment, not prevention. So let's talk 13th century. So you could get, if you were already sick, you could get some for humus treatments, for example, bloodletting, purging from the anus, or you could do vomiting or sweating. There were religious ones like giving gifts or praying or having a mass said for you, or you can go to confession and confess your sins, hoping to get well again. Sometimes you might, if you're superstitious, be given amulets and charms. Someone might write you a spell you might keep by your bedside, or you might be treated with herbs, especially if you go to an apothecary. They might give you some herbs that might do the job. Now, we're looking for things that are different. Now, there wasn't a lot of difference in the 16th century. The Renaissance was quite similar, wasn't it? They still used bloodletting, purging, sweating. They still did religious methods, spiritual methods like charms and herbs. I suppose with herbs, you could say there was a difference because they used different herbs now that the New World had been discovered. But really what we're looking for is something that hasn't been done before. And there were two new things in the Renaissance, weren't there? You'll remember that they used chemical cures and alchemy in order to find new solutions, and they used a new one called transference. So chemical cures were things like mixing of metals together, alchemical practices using a mortar and pestle. Things like mercury were used to make people vomit. And then transference was that new way of doing things. They used to rub an onion, for example, on themselves to transfer the illness from the person onto the object, and then they could throw that object away. So we could use one of those ones in our answer. Now, what I'm going to ask you guys to do is to take a moment and pause very soon and write your own answer. Remember, talk about the 13th century and give an example. So you've got plenty of examples there. And then talk about the 16th century and give an example using probably either chemical cures or transference because they were the new ones. Okay, so pause them now and spend no more than 5 or 6 minutes thinking about it and writing it. Okay, so I've chosen to use the chemical cures one because I quite like that one. So remember, when we write our answer, and I'm going to show you what I'm doing now, always discuss era 1 first, then give an example, and then go on to number 2. So let's have a look at era number 1. I've said, in the 13th century, there was a heavy reliance on the 4 humus treatments, such as, and here's the example, bleeding, cutting the skin, or purging, ejecting matter from the anus, to balance the humours in the body, much of which have been carried over since the time of Galen. Now, the weird thing is into era 2, they still did do the 4 humours. So what I need to do is I need to make sure that I just explain that they still do that, but they've added some new methods. So here we go. While this practice continued, it was beginning to reduce in the 16th century with new methods of treatments being used or preferred. One example following on from Paracelsus's interest in alchemy, and this was the use of chemical cures. This involved the mixing of metals together to form new remedies. For example, and here it is, mercury was used to cause vomiting despite it being poisonous. Now you probably don't need to add that last part, just a bit of flourish there. But what we have then is we've essentially talked about what happened in the 1300s. So we've talked about this bit here was talking about the 13th century, and then we've talked about the 16th century, and we've come up with something here that was different, talking about chemical cures, with an example of mercury being given. The difficulty comes with this one is because you do have the 4 humours carried over, so it's not completely different. But as long as you say that it continued, but there was now new methods being added, then you've acknowledged that it did carry over, but new things were being done. So there's your difference, and there's your answer. 2 short little parts, and that should give us 4 marks.